welcome everybody. We're going to do our normal Friday. We asked a friend of mine, Lionel, to join us to lead the chat for the first, generally speaking, it's 20 minutes, and then we'll see where we get to afterwards in terms of conversation. I'll remind you, in case you didn't know already, that the headline is how they do it in. It's like a series of sessions that we do on trying to learn from people in other places. We've done this before from Sweden. We've done it from South Africa. Ubuntu, if you recall that, from Isaiah, it was a fascinating conversation. We talked about the value of trust in Sweden and how that can and consensus and the value of that in innovation. And that was very much a pro and con conversation. And over the next couple of months, we hope to hear from Santa Fe in Argentina. We're looking at New Orleans and a couple of other places around the world as that series continues. So for today, if we look at a place that's doing particularly well in terms of innovation, from Ireland's perspective, what little we know about it, well, it just so happens that we know a guy. Now, this little thing is part of what's called the Innovation 360 approach. So that's a commercial thing that I do. And Lionel and I first met online doing our accreditations with Innovation 360. And we've been talking to each other for a few years. And we met in Stockholm in the Royal Palace in the summer when we had what we call a black belt summit. So the people who do this thing, who do this Innovation 360 thing, if they have one of these things, the black belts, then they get a very special invitation to spend loads of money to go to Sweden. So we spent loads of money, we went to Sweden, and Lionel led us on a fascinating session. And the topic of the day wasn't Singapore, but the way Lionel approaches it is pure Lionel. So it was because of particularly the session that Lionel led in Stockholm that I said, oh, it'd be great to get Lionel to our club. So with that, Lionel, I invite you to give us a little piece of your wisdom and your humility and a little bit of humor joined in and show us how they do it in Singapore.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for the kind introduction. I'll just share a very short introduction about myself. I graduated as a civil engineer, and I was working for one of the largest back then, more than 20 years ago, a French company called Bouygues. And they're telecoms, construction, and all that. And after working for them for less than a year, it made me realize I didn't want to be a civil engineer. So from building I would say condominiums, stadiums, and what's not, right? I went on to building businesses. And shortly after, I found myself in China. Spent a good 4 years over there. Managed to see the transition from one emperor to the next. And it was quite a bloodbath. It was quite an interesting experience. And from then on, I came back to Singapore and have been doing different kind of ventures for the last 10 years. Cutting across from restaurants to working advisory with real estate developers on concept planning, placemaking, all the way to autonomous robotics in airports to AI. And it was 6-7 years ago that I chanced upon Innovation 360, the wheel that Ion pointed out to, and I found that to be extremely fascinating. I was wondering whether it could be a framework to be used to evaluate startup ideas as an investor. So that was my main key driver in going into learning and being accredited and all that. Yeah. So I will dive straight into my presentation. Actually, it's not really a presentation, it's a sharing. And I myself was quite surprised about Ireland. Let me just share this now first. Give me a second. So I would say that I am in innovation by practice, by building businesses. Yeah, so that's the kind of I did it in reverse. I didn't have any methodology, and now I'm just paying back my dues, right? By going for all sorts of certifications and what's not. Okay.
That looks clear, Lionel. You're going to put that on the...
Yeah, I'm going to put full screen. Give me a second. Yeah. Okay. So Singapore, right? I just found out actually the last few days that our land size is 1% of Ireland. and yet our population is slightly more than Ireland. Ireland currently stands about 5.2 something million. You guys probably have the most updated figures. But in terms of GDP and GDP per capita, GDP wise, we are lesser than Ireland. Ireland is at 577. GDP per capita, we are also lesser than Ireland. The best thing about Singapore, and if we were to compare as a place to work as compared to Ireland, is our tax. Our tax is definitely lower. You guys are on the 2040 thing, and we are it. If you don't cross a certain threshold, right, it can be less than 5%. Yeah. And if you're a good businessman with proper accounting structure, it can get even lower than that. Yeah, so it really depends on what kind of business you do as well. So we have four major faiths: Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism. The majority being Buddhist or Taoist. And we have four major races: Chinese, Malay, Indian, Eurasian. So when Lee Kuan Yew, the founding father of Singapore, many consider him to be, in 1965, right? He made this famous quote that, this is not a Malay nation. This is not a Chinese nation. This is not an Indian nation. Everyone will have his place, equal. Language, culture, religion. So that set the bedrock of our nation. And I believe that in anyone who wants to do good business, who want to do good innovation, or who want to do a good platform, right? This has to be the case where everyone has a fair fighting chance. Let's see. Sorry. Yeah. Not sure why okay. I think the resolution jumped. But basically there are four key pillars. Give me a second. That is on what makes Singapore special. And give me a second. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, it jumped. It's
We're
fine.
innovating, Lionel. We're innovating on the spot.
Yours can still see my screen?
We were able to see your screen, no problem, but we did see that there's only a portion of the text showing up.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. Wait, let me just go back to it. Give me a second. I think too many documents. Yeah. So sorry. Yeah, you can see my shot now, right? So the four key factors, right? So sorry about the alignment. The four key factors is just global capital, then global influence, global business, and I will go through the last one as we go through the slides. Okay, so the key thing is this: when we talk about global investments, right? How many registered funds do we have in Singapore? 1,198.
Wow.
Yes, and these are all registered funds with the government and all that. And if you talk about the VCs as well, on the left side, right, there are three charts. ISL is Israel, Singapore is SG, and Silicon Valley is SV. So in terms of the number of the VCs that are in Singapore, is 838. Yeah, pardon about the alignment, it jumped. Yeah, so it's 838. We are just below Silicon Valley. And if you look at the deal value, right, of Singapore versus the whole of Southeast Asia, combined together for the 5 nations, we are double of it. Yeah, it's about $6 billion. So all the wheeling and dealing happens in Singapore itself. And another reason why is that why Singapore is such a hub for wealth is because it's safe. First and foremost, the rule of law, it's held very strictly. It's inherited from our British overlord days. We follow the law of UK, and so as such, right? We also we have. What is interesting in Asia is this: every businessman that is successful in Southeast Asia, most of them have relocated their family members to Singapore for their education, their wives, so they remotely control their empire from Singapore. Of course they spend most of their time in the countries of their operations, but where their family is all in Singapore. So we have been a mini UN for the last 20 years. which is why there's no surprise once we came out for the framework for family offices, it skyrocketed 14 times since 2017 to 2023, barely 6-7 years. Yeah, we have about 1,400 family offices here. So the likes of Ray Dalio, Bridgewater Fund Manager, his family office is in Singapore. Yeah. And when we talk about global connectivity, right, and doing global business, we have the highest number of regional HQs in the area. And we have 4,200 of them, and we have 27 free trade agreement areas, signed with different parts of the world, different alliances, and all that. What does that mean? When you register a company in Singapore, when you do business in Singapore, you have access to talent, networks, and connections. Yeah, you don't have to go, you fly everywhere. Everyone flies into Singapore, so it actually makes doing business globally easier. Yeah, so this is what I just shared. EDB basically governs bringing foreign investment into Singapore. So if anyone has any questions moving forward in future, feel free to ask me. Happy to hook you up to one of my friends in EDB. We are always looking for people who want to do business in Singapore. Yeah, and this is by Startup Genome, the ranking. So out of all the nations, we are ranked number 7 in terms of startup. And in the following slides, you will understand why. And when you see the different kind of matrix that we have been pitted against, performance, funding, talent, experience, market reach, and knowledge, we are good for most of them, except for knowledge. Because it's funny when because this whole conversation is about innovation, right? Innovation Ireland. But the truth is that Singaporeans, right, rarely invent anything new, but we are very good at looking at an unfinished product and using innovation to make it into a commercializable product that can be scaled. So we are a very good place to scale prototype and minimum viable products for the hinterland and for the world. That's our strong suit. Once you put on the Singapore stamp of authority of our standards and regulations, right, it becomes a global product. So that is also one of the positioning we take for the best companies around Asia. Those that want to enter into the global markets, they use Singapore as a springboard. So this is from WIPO, Worldwide Intellectual Property Office, and their Global Innovation Index. So clearly you can see for Southeast Asia, we are considered in Asia, Oceania, we are number 1. And in terms of Global Innovation Index, we're number 5. But funny story, and I think I told Yon this before, and our friends in the Black Belt Summit, we rank very highly. You can see a lot of top 10 rankings, right? But we don't have a top 50 most innovative company in Singapore. And that ranking comes from BCG, not from any of these players. So how do you make sense out of this? That like, oh, we are top 10 in so many of these innovation rankings, right? But how come we don't have a top 50 most innovative company? So mainly, right, a lot of the innovation we do, right, is system integration rather than being the genesis of innovation or invention, so to speak. Yeah. And these are some of the big events in Singapore that we get global influence. Switch, Slingshot, ATX, Singapore FinTech Festival. So Singapore FinTech Festival sits alongside Token 2049 for people who are in Web3. So usually intersects with F1 in Singapore. Our Token 2049 and F1 is at the same time. So it's just a lot of parties as well. So one of the key things, one of our strategies was called concert economics. Taylor Swift only performed in Singapore because we cut a deal with her. And this was done 2 years beforehand. Yeah, so every other minister, right, obviously very upset, like, hey, how come, Taylor Swift doesn't fly in and doesn't perform in other Asian cities? Then we just play coy, we didn't say anything. But the truth is that the money we gave her, we made more than enough from all the travels coming in. So it was actually a venture deal. It's a VC deal by a government level. Yeah. Because you have to park alongside entertainment next to all the serious business stuff. So this is something we do very well. This is from DHL. It's quite a recent report. And if you look at it, these are the most globalized, supposedly, right, the most globalized countries. But actually, if you look at their scorecard, it's actually pretty low, except for UK. I don't know how is it going to work now with Brexit. I think that would take off their ranking to go lower. But if you look at this, so in terms of globalization or global connectedness, right, we're actually number one. And Ireland is actually not too far off at number 3 at 74. Yeah, so there's something that both Ireland and Singapore has that is a magnet for innovation at this point of time in history. Yeah. And I was just very surprised that our population is about the same. So of course, when you talk about innovation, we cannot veer away from AI. Not that AI is the god of innovation, but Singapore recognized that AI is going to be very, very important. And we actually created a government body under the National University of Singapore. So it's actually under the National University of Singapore. It's not under a government body per se, to drive capabilities, right? The competencies and the capabilities for AI in Singapore. So we call it a national AI strategy. What has happened is that most recently we also have created the playbook for there's an alliance of small states, an AI strategy for that, together with Rwanda. Yeah, this is how we punch above our weight, by actually having the most unlikely kind of alliances to anyone who is willing to do it with us, and then we'll co-create programs together. So out of some of all these programs that National AI Strategy has, right, the most interesting one to me is 100 experiments. So what is this 100 experiments? We actually fund. First of all, right, we get people who have not done computing. If you have never done computing, it's fine. We put you through a 6 to 9 months on-the-job training with AI, and then we need to find a sponsor company, and government funds up dollar for dollar up to 180,000 Singapore dollars to create the real world AI MVM, means minimum viable model, because when you talk about AI, it's all about models, yeah, and data sets. So with this, right, it's so successful that a few countries around the world, including Egypt, actually adopted our whole program for their whole nation. Yeah. And this, as you can see, the first picture, right, Q&M is a dental company. So they use AI to go through all the radiology graphs, all the x-rays and all that, to build their own competencies. Below, you will see IBM. Sompo is a big Japanese insurance company. Yeah. And these are like the number of experiments. It has already exceeded 100 experiments. So the government views this as a very good, a good success story. And the other thing that we want to be very good at is in high-tech manufacturing, especially in the fields of biology, pharmaceutical science, and life sciences. And we even peg the number that it has to be 20% of our GDP. Currently, it's less than 10. Actually, it's growing it has been sliding out for many years ever since China rose. So earlier on, when Yon asked me the question, how's our relationship with China? Do we want them to do well? I would say it is bittersweet kind of relationship. We kind of want them to do well, but not too well. Yeah, because it impacts. And in fact, right, the funny thing is this: because of this whole exodus of foreign FDI from China, we actually became beneficiaries of it. And because of the exodus, and people leaving Hong Kong as well, so we also benefited it from it. So initially, Singapore's, I would say our growth was slowing down, but because of the series of things that happened after COVID, our numbers went up. Yeah. Let me see. I think I'm pretty much, yeah. So this is very interesting. It's called Singapore Plus One. We want everyone to register their regional HQ, our HQ in Singapore, but we don't have land, we don't have enough power, and because everyone is going green, our carbon tax now is about 25 Singapore dollars per ton. In 2 years' time, it's going to be $40 per ton, and we don't have natural, we don't have dams, we don't have wind. We have a lot of sun, but somehow we are not capitalizing on it. I have no idea why. So we are going to be any business that is of manufacturing nature, right? Obviously, is going to be heavily taxed. So how are we going to sort that out? So what we came up with is a Southeast Asia Manufacturing Alliance. We work with Malaysia, Indonesia, and Vietnam. So you register your company in Singapore, but we have partnership agreements with some of the largest companies from Singapore in property. That's Capital Land. That's the largest capital developer of Singapore. Gallant Venture Engineering Company, Samcott Engineering Company. We will work with all these partner countries to develop their industrial estates, and such that the money flow goes through Singapore, but the manufacturing hub is based in all these countries. And because of this, Malaysia rose literally like a phoenix from the ashes. Yeah, sometimes people forget that two of their planes went missing. Like one got shot down and one went missing. But I think at the end of the day, right, money is, when it cost of production or cost of business, that still takes center stage for many people. So we literally stopped issuing licenses for data centers because we don't have enough electricity. That is notwithstanding all the electrification that's needed for electric vehicles. So a lot of business spilled over to Malaysia. And their current Prime Minister, Anwar, traditionally did not like Singapore. Yeah. And but because he doesn't have a solid hold of power over his parliament, he has no choice but to play nice right now, because we are literally like Santa Claus. We are literally giving deals to all these countries because we don't have the land to deal with all this kind of manufacturing. Yeah, but we have the know-how, we have the governance. So I always tell people that Singapore, right, it's it's governance as a service, at the bedrock of the country. Yeah, I'll just stop sharing now. Yeah. So I mean, just to add on a little bit more, Singapore, how we innovate. This is a funny story. Our education system, being an Asian country, is very based on grades. It's based on grades. Whether you get an A, you get 90 plus, you get an A, and all that. But Singapore, in order to encourage our next generation to be more creative, we started to do away with grades. We put people in bandings. So we just tell you whether you got band 1, band 2, band 3. And we got rid of ranking of schools. Okay, guess what? The parents did their own ranking of schools. Crazy Asian parents, right? But I mean, jokes aside, the typical Singaporean, I would say, when our founding father, Lee Kuan Yew, was around, it was when Singaporeans were the most creative. We had nothing, it was swampland, and we really had to innovate. And we have to get foreign direct investment, and we have to make sure that it worked. But one of the the greatest innovations that the government came up with, or the first the founding fathers of Singapore did, right, was a strong monetary system. A solid currency was always their first thing. So we buy a lot of gold for a very small country. Number 2 was connectivity. So our airports, before you hear of Singapore, you hear of Singapore Airlines, our ports, PSA, Ports Singapore Authority, right? We actually, Port Singapore Authority, the Ports Authority and the airport authorities both have their own investment arms, and we invest in ports and airports all over the world. That's what people do not know. And we actually do a lot of advisory deals. Yeah, so we don't have much to show off. We don't have much land. So whenever we do a mega project, it has to be like the crown jewel of Asia. It has to be. And we will work with the top architects, Frank Gehry, Zaha Hadid, and all these top people to make sure that like people will notice us, truly. Yeah. And so when going back to like the most innovative company, right, the closest we ever had was a company called Creative. 20 years ago, they created the MP3, the sound system, the scrolling wheel that you see on the iPods and all that. They went on to a 20-year legal battle with Apple. Of course, Apple won. No, sorry, Creative won. Apple lost, but Apple blocked Creative out of all its platforms. So you win a battle, but you lost the war. And that was the closest thing we had to a very creative company that created something that the whole world uses. Yeah. The other one was about USB technology, Track 2000. Same thing, was locked up in a legal battle with a Dutch firm for 20 over years. And in the end, there was a lot of financial malingering done by the Singapore side, you know. So my point is that there were two great stories, but end up in, you know, with trials, patent trials, and could not focus on building the business. So what has happened now is that we figured out that among ourselves Singaporeans, we are a perfect sandbox because people from all over the world are now here. So if you want to do focus groups, you want to do market testing, GTM, you know, rapid prototyping, this is a very good place to have. It's a very safe place. Education is very, I would say it's pretty good. Two of our universities are in the top 50 in the world. And we are very research grant friendly. So this is something that I will tell you off the cuff. We have something called National Research Foundation. It sits under the Prime Minister's office. It governs about, every year it gives out $2 billion in terms of research grants. And out of this, right, we work with 18 of the top research institutes around the world. That is how we keep tabs. But Singapore being in such a comfortable state right now, you know what happens when you have a lot of money? You don't invest haphazardly. You don't just buy a Bitcoin and hope it goes up to $10,000 or $100,000, right? When you have wealth, and all that, you just put money into fixed deposits. You know, you start to have an aversion to risk. Yeah. So there is a very clear correlation between how well the country is doing, how safe it is, how stable it is. I dare say it's inversely correlated to ability to innovate. Yeah, or desire to innovate, or hunger to innovate. So we are faced with this. Yeah.
Lionel,
yeah.
that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much. We've spent, well, quite a lot of Lionel's time preparing for today. Thank you very much. And in very, very, very short amount of time, well less than half an hour, we've got an amazing overview of Singapore. And the slides, by the way, I'll put up in the portal afterwards. They're really simple. They're really visual. I think they'll be easy for us to use in the future. And one thing for me is, you know, we're not the same as Singapore. We're not trying to copy Singapore, although but that comparison, I think we can learn a lot from, not just today. You know, we might come back to this theme another day. So a small enough group, what I might do is go around the room and ask for reflections. But before we go around the room, I could just quickly say that even that question of the 1% size versus the same population makes me think of some of the challenges that Ireland has now, like getting enough housing for our people. If Singapore could do that, you know, we have a lot to learn on just in that one single place. The idea or the image of the boiling pot, which was a phrase in my head, Lionel didn't quite use it, but it's all the cultures, the languages, and they all, it's stated from the start that everybody's the same and we all have an interest and a stake and a possibility for the future. And any of the US Constitution says the same, and we like to think that that's part of what's unique about us. But the fact that the role that plays and the strength that Lionel puts on that as being that's so important to how Singapore succeeded, I think that's priceless, really fascinating to me. The connectivity, I think we can relate to that. Dublin Airport and limits on passengers, you know, and so on and so on and so on. Also, the lack of indigenous global top innovators. I don't think we can point and say we are the best in the world at inventing things, although, you know, there's a bit of history there. So the comparisons for me are just fascinating. So I've got questions that I'll come back to, but what I might do is be totally unfair and just point to someone in the room and just ask them what they think and what they might like to come back to Lionel on, maybe to go back to a particular slide or particular data point or particular insight. So again, I'm being totally unfair. I'm going to start with our other international colleague, our French-Canadian import. Eric, what do you think?
Oh, I think fantastic presentation. Kind of topical, considering where I was yesterday. I was at Amplify 24, which is the innovation conference here in Ireland, and I was attending a talk around how we can be more innovative around infrastructure, and one of the countries that was mentioned was Singapore and Denmark. The kind of similar size, similar population, but two places that are highly innovative, especially around infrastructure. One of the comments that was mentioned actually was that maybe Ireland is being too insular in their thinking and they're not looking outward enough. And when we look outward, we usually tend to look at the UK and not past the UK. And they're not probably the best example around infrastructure. So that was fascinating. And I think that what you just mentioned, and I'd be really curious to hear a bit more about kind of the government innovation strategy or how they support kind of the innovation ecosystem. What else did I hear that was your education system? I would be really, because I mean, a lot of people here and having a son that's going through the leaving cert at the moment and my daughter that's going through, our education system needs to be retaught. And I'm curious to see how long did it take you to kind of, well, not you personally, but as a country, how long did it take to transform that education system and change that and being accepted? Because I can see it here taking years. I think they've been talking about it for years already, a bit like the metro system, without nothing happening really. But yeah, I'd be curious to hear more about that. And I was really excited about the AI stuff, but that's me. And I actually opened straight away your national AI strategy and your 100 experiments website, and I'm gonna digest all that and probably have loads of questions after that.
Sure.
So Lionel, what I might do then is I'm going to ask Duncan and Paul and then Shirley, probably in that order, for absolutely no reason. But before I ask them, would you care to pick up on something that I raised or something that Eric raised to just give it another little bit of detail or a reflection?
I think I will answer Eric on terms of the education. It took us about 15 to 20 years to change.
Right.
And that is over 3 to 4 different ministers. In Singapore, our ministers, unlike the Western world, right, they hardly disappear. They have been there. It's almost like a career. And they are almost civil servants, even though they should not be, you know. They are parliamentarians, right? Yeah, it took 3 different education ministers to bring forward that effect. And the latest one was the one that put it into effect of removing grades and putting people into bands. Because one of his kid is autistic. So I feel that at the end of the day, there's always a personal cause that someone has felt it deeply enough to make a difference. Yeah, so and that's why when we always say, right, can one person make a difference? Yes, I would say yes. It does. Yeah.
Can you explain what you mean by bands in terms of the Singapore education? What is a band?
Band 1, band 2, band 3. So, you know, I mean, the exact numbers, you know, so it's within almost like a 10, 15 marks, like let's say 60 to 75, you know, 75 to 85, then 85 and beyond. Yeah. So you are given a band. So you don't actually know the exact grade you got. Yeah, good luck calculating your GPA, you know. Yeah, and we also got rid of, I would say, at 12 years old, in Singapore, right, we call it primary 6. And there are some schools that now you don't have to do a primary 6 exam. You can go through train all the way from 7 to 16. Yeah, yeah, we still haven't demolished but there are some that actually went from 7 all the way to 18, but those are for really the creme de la creme of Singapore. So it gives them more time and space to work out on subjects, creativity, project work, you know, rather than focusing insularly on a particular subject like math, science, more advanced science and all that. Yeah.
Brilliant, Lionel. I wonder then on the question of the 100 experiments, is there a link you can maybe put in the chat during the next 20 minutes for Eric and others on that? That'd be fantastic. Yeah. And I think we might leave the AI question to a little bit later. We've got a few minutes left. So Duncan, did I volunteer you next? And are you actually still willing to speak to us? Which is the, you know, those questions go together.
Yeah, absolutely. So Lionel, first of all, thanks very much. That was really interesting and very, very well presented. Just to give you a little background, I work for Revenue Irish Tax and Customs. So I have over the years had contacts with the Inland Revenue Authority of Singapore, who would be well regarded internationally as a very progressive, innovative and effective tax administration. And I think certainly as revenue and tax administrations can learn a lot from what you guys do there in that space. I think I'm just very struck. I think, like Owen maybe has been and others, are about the similarities as well. Okay, leaving aside the size of the land issue, and we certainly don't maximize the value of our land in this country like you do, so we could certainly learn from that. But it's interesting we have the common law background. I think I could be wrong, guys, but I think we're the only country left in the EU with that. We also have English as an international language, and we have another language here, Irish, but we're very lazy. We tend to just not learn that very well very often, because everybody we meet internationally wants to speak in English and practice their English. Regional accents and sort of affectations aside, we're generally able to communicate anywhere we go in the world. So that's an interesting similarity we have too. And I think we're also a very open economy, as you know, and I think you showed that in one of your tables there. We're very connected globally too. So a lot of similarities, some of which stem back to the fact that we were all part of a very large empire at one point. So what I do is I work with developing countries to improve their tax and customs administration. And it's interesting if I'm in Uganda or Malawi, where they also have the common law basis, the connection points are quicker. Than say if you're working with somebody who has a civil law background to where they've come from. Yeah, so there are lots of similarities and definitely lots of opportunities for collaboration and cooperation, I would say. Us small countries have to stick together. Bigger guys can be jealous about us quite a lot in lots of fields, and they might come after us and isolate us because we are outliers in many ways. Ireland's an outlier population wise in the OECD. As you probably know, we should have a larger population than we do today, but for relatively tragic historical reasons, we don't have that. So we do stand out as being a bit weird. And finally, I have an Italian colleague of mine who used to work with me in Irish Revenue, moved to Singapore 12 years ago with his family and loves it and has bought a place to stay, and he's not going. He thinks it's a great place to live. I was only chatting to him recently, so at some point I hope to go and visit him. It's on the list.
We welcome you.
So thanks again. It was great, very interesting. I might have to jump off early, guys, because I have another back-to-back call, but listen, really good, Owen, and thanks for organizing, and thanks again, Lionel. Great.
Thanks, Duncan. I would emphasize that when we do these things, we get someone to lead our chat, but it's a conversation starter. So some of the greatest things that have happened is where we've had a session with a person that started a conversation, and we've done another thing a couple of months later, or it's fed into our next face-to-face meeting, or it's fed in recent times, particularly with Catherine, who's very good at this, at how we should engage with actors of state and how we think those actors of state can act in future. Enterprise Ireland, IDA, SFI, Intertrade Ireland and Northern Ireland, and so on and so forth. So it's not just what we do in the hour, it's what use we make out of it afterwards. I'm going to bring in Paul, but before I do, one of the other things that really struck me is connectivity and being a good partner. We're not scary. We're smaller than the other guys. Okay, Mr. French, it's your turn, and welcome to Innovate Island. This is your first visit, so thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and it was a great presentation, Lionel. Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
all
I
good?
hear you perfectly.
Excellent.
Well.
So I want to touch on a point that you mentioned towards the end of your conversation on how the more stable an entity becomes, whether that's an organization or a nation or a government body, they become more risk averse, right? Now, one of the things that was mentioned in a previous talk I attended recently was that as an organization grows or an entity grows, the frequency of correctness matters more than the magnitude of correctness. The magnitude of correctness is more important when you're a startup, when you're initially innovating, when there's more risk. So I'm curious to hear, even though that it's becoming more stable and things are becoming more risk averse, how have you noticed Singapore dealing with that to ensure that the innovation or the amount of innovation is kept up, even though it's becoming more stable?
All I can tell you is, okay, there's two opinions to this, right? First, it's the general public's perception, and whether do they. Okay, let me put it very simply. The reason why we have such good housing, right, is because that's how they lock you in to be a hamster on the wheel for the next 30 years. Okay, so if I'm going to provide you affordable housing, 30 years, and the government provides the loan, can you beat that? Yeah. So it's comparatively, sometimes it's lower, sometimes it's higher than the market rate, but it's pretty consistent. Yeah. So in order to have a stable workforce, the first mantra is, go get a degree and work for a stable company. Yeah, so this is in 80% of the mindset. So people who are innovative are already considered outliers, or anyone who wants to do a businessman, because the cost of doing business in Singapore, even though it costs maybe less than $100 to register a company in Singapore, but to hire people, you guys face the same problem. If you're hiring white collar professionals, it's very expensive now. The cost of living and all that. I used to be an owner in a restaurant as well. Let me put it this way, because rentals have went up, even the Malaysians who used to cross the borders to work in all these blue collar jobs stopped coming because it wasn't worth it. The standard of living has dropped. Yeah. So right now, right, we are at the precipice of being uncomfortable because of global inflation. And that is making everyone feeling uncomfortable. I'm sure you guys feel the same way. A meal, a pint of beer, ridiculous. It's almost double. It feels like double. It's not exactly double, but it feels like double. And I think this is what is happening, and that is making a lot of people in their 40s and 50s. Let me tell you something about China. Because of the pullout of foreign investment and foreign company, what happened was that we are experiencing the greatest wave of entrepreneurship of people between their 40s and 50s who from day one in China, they are Chinese nationals, who came from good universities or average universities, but have worked for Fortune 500 companies from day one, or FTSE 1000. Do you think they can work for the local companies? They can't. The culture is completely different. Yeah, the culture of the Western world, right? Don't bother me. There is work-life balance, and if you harass me after 6 o'clock, I have a right whether I want to respond or not. To the Chinese, right? They have no such luxury. Yeah. Sometimes I reply emails at like 11, 12, and it's expected. It is not because I'm such a hard worker. I'm afraid I might lose my job. Yeah. So it's funny that China is experiencing this discomfort faster than everyone else, which makes it very dangerous because they were almost lulled into a false sense of security from how much money they were making, how much forex they were absorbing, right, into the country because of all their exports. But now, because it's economic winter in China, the youth unemployment rate is almost 20% and it's climbing up. So fresh grads cannot find job. So in the end, right, this has caused them to like wake up and realize that, wow, the government may not be as good as what it seems to be. and with the guys who are in their 40s and 50s who are losing their jobs, normal attrition, right? Because traditionally every country in the world, 40s to 50s is that point whereby you a high chance of losing your job if you're not relevant. Yeah, so I feel that it's a combination of all these factors, but I feel that this whole global inflation thing is accelerating, whether it's willingness or unwillingness to innovate. Yeah, I don't quite know how to best put it. It's like what Shirley talked about the refugees. I'm very familiar with that because there's 350,000 Rohingya refugees in KL, near KL, Kuala Lumpur, in Malaysia. Yeah. And so part of the other hat that I wear is on social impact investments and social impact entrepreneurship, right? So it's about doing simple businesses for these people to survive. It's as simple as that. If not, they'll go to drugs, they will go to crime, and a lot of things that, Europe that takes in a lot of refugees are experiencing right now. Yeah.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So Lionel, then it's a couple of minutes to when we finish up. I'm not sure if Shirley is still with us, but take care, Duncan. That was really valuable. Thank you for your contributions. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Duncan.
And Shirley, if you are with us, if you'd care to comment, great. And if you're not entirely with us, then I will. Oh, ha. There she is. How are you doing? What do you think, Shirley?
I think it's super interesting. So, and yeah, I think what Singapore has done really well is it's world leading in many aspects of innovation. If anything that how people's behaviors have changed as a result of that, since these dramatic improvements. But what have you seen change? Because at the moment there is in Western regions, we see there's kind of a little bit of people are worried about digitization, innovation. how have behaviors changed? Is it's the question I really want to. So
I would say it affects the elderly, the seniors more than the young
okay.
ones. Obviously, that is something that is apparent across the whole world. But let me just cite another example of China. There are no more beggars. The beggars wear a lanyard with a QR code.
Really? That's it's fascinating. So yeah.
Okay, so and I arguably, right, I mean there's a lot of demerits and merits about this whole digitalization that is ongoing, but I would say the number one factor that brought street crime away from China was digitalization, because there was nothing to rob. And even if you rob the handphone, right, the triangulation of like the location, right, it is, China is Big Brother state. So you're not gonna run away. So I've always been pitching this idea, and maybe this is something for everyone here to think about as well. What if whatever happened in China, not in terms of the economic growth and how they run the whole country, but more of like, what if we can bring safety to like the most dangerous places in the world using digitalization? Yeah.
That's
That's
really
a great frame.
interesting, and how
Yeah.
it can be used to address inequalities, but you don't. The QR code round the beggar is just it's really interesting. Is you almost don't have the have-nots so much, or just it's really interesting. So
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thanks, Shirley. And I have a question that on the chat, so I want to get to that before the end. But Shirley, do you want to put another question back to Lionel, or will I go on to the other? Yeah.
I'm going to put a link into our EPIC research project, which we're looking at the minute. It is all about addressing inequalities in the region. And one of the things we're looking at, one of the challenges, is it's to address economic inactivity among kind of like the hidden unemployed. And I don't know if there's learnings that we can. I love the QR code round the back. If there's any learnings, we'd love to collaborate with you on that and what we could be doing better.
Yeah. I mean, happy to take this, in being mindful of the time, to bring this over, because that is something I'm really passionate about. I think no one is safe until everyone is safe.
That's
I
fantastic.
love that. No one is safe until everyone is safe. Exactly. And there is, I think we don't always view Eastern data centers as favorably because we're in almost anti-globalization at the moment in other countries. So yeah. So I could talk to you all day about this, but I want to let somebody else speak. But that's really interesting. Yeah.
That's fantastic, Shirley. I think because we're at the end of the hour, it's just one more question, and then we might have to invite Lionel back. Yeah. So, even if he doesn't want to come back, we'll drag him back. So give him half an opportunity. Okay, so if we look at the chat, there's a few connected comments, and really it's about housing, it's about infrastructure, it's about the government policy. And one thing for me that Lionel already said on this is there's a national research fund which is accountable to the Prime Minister. In other words, it skips layers of bureaucracy. So that's not the answer to Eric's question, but if we talk about housing and infrastructure, is there anything sensible we can say about good things that Singapore has done or is doing on either of those, or is it simple to just pick a couple of quick points?
You know why Singapore has no beggars? Or no one on the streets. We don't have homeless. Yeah, and it's because of housing. So the first thing, right, is to get rid of the homelessness in the country, and that is by providing affordable housing. And it is financed via we have a central provident fund. So a portion of it, of our salary goes directly to this central provident fund, and that fund funds the sovereign wealth fund. Then the sovereign wealth fund makes investment, whether internally or externally. And I think just like Ireland being a miraculous turnaround in the last 20 years, if you invested in like Irish economy, you probably will make money. And some of these big companies and all that. So this is what has happened to Singapore. All our top companies that are listed in Singapore are all funded partially or partially owned by the government of Singapore. So we are the government of Singapore is the largest landlord as well as the largest employer, private and public. Yeah.
Investor, landlord, employer, supporter. Wow.
Almost communist or socialist but capitalistic.
If you
Yeah.
look at the European example just for a second, and we talk about Scandinavia, and then you look about whether they're socialist or capitalist, well, it kind of misses the point. You often find that government will set up a framework, but then it'll be contracted out to local or different shaped private providers. And so you see a complete mix of private and public, even in places that say they're being socialistic or that claim they're being capitalistic, and what's happening one layer or 3 layers down is entirely different. And if we look at models for housing, it's probably not the first time it's been mentioned here, but Vienna is closer to Singapore, but the scale is not a million miles off. And they similarly have a near zero homelessness, and it's viewed as a great place to live. Why? It's a big city, there's plenty of traffic, but so Singapore is an amazing example. It's not the only one, but it's what examples we're looking for. It's the lenses you ask, it's the questions you ask. So what I'd say about today is, Lionel, you sparked some great interest. You've started some really great conversations. It was a fantastic presentation. Thank you very much. The slides will be up on the portal, and there is a recording of today's meeting, so we will get around to putting that up as well. It won't be me that does that. As you know, Charlie is far more technically competent than I. But if anybody has a final question to leave us with, fantastic. But other than that, I think it's time to enjoy your weekends, everybody.